belleza y tú no estás. Mi amor regresa pronto sin que allí ora el mar. Pasan los cocuyos cual cascada. Todo nuestro nido sigue igual, con toda esa belleza y tú no estás. Mi amor regresa pronto sin tardar, que yo me estoy muriendo de ansiedad y el nido está esperando. Vuelve ya.
Good morning, and welcome to the Brooklyn Waterfront Research Center at City Tech, and welcome to our breakfast talk. Today is a big topic, the topic of last mile distribution warehouses, distribution centers. We have all kinds of names for these facilities, but we will be discussing several that are under construction or soon to be operational in the Red Hook section of the Brooklyn Waterfront. Today we have actually this topic has brought in a lot of people, and so many of you might be new to these breakfast talks. So if you don't mind, I'll just introduce the Brooklyn Waterfront Research Center. Again, my name is Richard Hanley. I am the director. The Brooklyn Waterfront Research Center is located at CUNY's City Tech. And what our mission is to bring the study of the Brooklyn Waterfront to our students, which is their neighborhood. Our college is right across the street from the entrance to the Brooklyn Bridge. And we also have a series of public events, breakfast talks on this very serious topic. And we have had other topics, both historical and sometimes whimsical. We started off our first Zoom breakfast talk at the beginning of the pandemic with a discussion of bird watching in Brooklyn Bridge Park. Today is going to be a much heavier discussion than that one. And what the structure of today's conversation, we're lucky to have four very distinguished panelists. And first, what we're going to do is our first panelist is going to give us an overview of the phenomenon of these facilities. Then we'll have some discussion of environmental and also regional effects of these. We will then have a discussion of the community effects in Red Hook. And then we're going to have a look at not necessarily a solution, but perhaps an amelioration by looking at the maritime angle to these warehouses, especially since because of their location along the Brooklyn waterfront. We'll be looking at some of the questions that we will have, such as, are they needed? Are they needed in these places? What are the advantages to locating here? What use might they make of the water? What are the benefits and or advantages to the companies? How about the benefits and or advantages to the communities? And what about on a macro state, the city, the region, the state? And what I'll do is I'll introduce all of our panelists now, and then we will start. So our first speaker is going to be Allison Conway, who is an associate professor of civil engineering at City College of New York. She's also a member of the research team for Metro Freight, a Volvo Research Education Foundation Center of Excellence of Urban Freight. She researches primarily in the areas of urban freight and city logistics, freight data, multimodal interactions in the urban environment. Then Thaddeus Pawlowski is going to speak. He's the managing director of the Center for Resilient Cities and Landscapes at Columbia University, where he's also a research scholar, adjunct associate professor of urban design and urban planning, and an active member in community activities in the Red Hook neighborhood. And he's going to be talking about some environmental perspectives of these facilities. We're then going to hear from Karen Dawn Blondell, who's a 2022 Loeb Fellow at the Harvard School of Design. She's a community leader and longtime resident of public housing in Red Hook. In 2020, she founded the Public Housing Civic Association, a local community-based nonprofit organization that gives voice to public housing residents as they address issues related to the built environment. And so we have a Harvard fellow with us. I'm going to take this opportunity to do a little advertising for the Brooklyn Waterfront Research Center, because I noticed in our registrants today is the BWRC fellow for 2021, 2022, and that's Nathan Kensinger, who I heard this morning on WNYC talking about the environmental legacy of our current mayor, Mayor de Blasio. And then our final panelist is John Talowski, who's the founder, president, and CEO of Altair Transportation, which is a company designed to find ways to use the vast marine highway system to reduce congestion and minimize air pollution while efficiently moving all types of freight. And he's going to be a very good voice to hear from in this discussion. And so without further ado, one more thing, a couple of business items. If you want to say hello to someone, or some maybe links that you want to share with everyone, you could use the chat function. We hold the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen for questions that we'd like, or that you could present to the speakers as we go along. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Allison at first, and then Thaddeus, then Karen, then John. So Allison, thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Richard. So good morning, everyone. What I'm going to do is just give a very broad overview of some of the things that are changing in e-commerce, how that's affected the way that the supply chain is organized, and some general trade-offs that need to be considered when warehouses come into a community. I'm going to leave the specifics of the Red Hook community to Karen, who is much more expert than I am on that topic. So first, just really high level, what's been happening in e-commerce. Prior to COVID, so before we even had any of this work from home and reorganize, retail stores closing, e-commerce was growing at a rate of about 17% per year. So there was tremendous growth happening even before COVID. During COVID, we had massive acceleration, particularly of direct to home delivery services. So when public health became a concern about going into a retail store, suddenly solutions that previously were very not popular in New York City. So for example, a very small percentage of New Yorkers were getting groceries delivered to their homes. That changed because of the public health considerations, which means that 17% annual growth accelerated tremendously. So we saw growth that we might have expected over a decade happening over 18 months of the pandemic in terms of the scale of growth in these services. In addition to just overall growth in these services, we've also shown this increasing trend towards very on-demand services. So if we were talking about delivery to home 20 years ago. You know, you ordered from a catalog and waited 2 weeks and then your goods arrived. Then Amazon came on the scene and that got shorter and it became a week. Then it became 3 or 4 days. Then we had Amazon Prime, which became 2 days. Then we had Prime Now, which became 2 hours. Now, if you walk around, you see advertisements for 15-minute delivery services for goods like groceries. And so that means that we've got this huge demand for goods being delivered directly to home right now. We also, prior to COVID and especially during COVID, saw the emergence of what we call omni-channel retail models. And that's where a retail store may serve as both a store and a warehouse. So the biggest example of this might be when Amazon acquired Whole Foods a few years ago. Now you see a large number of Amazon grocery deliveries happening from the Whole Foods facilities. And Amazon made a strategic move there, recognizing that there's going to be this blended business model where we have retail stores and warehouses that are not distinct from each other, but where the retail store is almost serving as a warehouse. So the picture that you see on the right is something I see in my neighborhood every weekend. And it's actually come to not just be the weekend. This is what's happening all over New York at the curbside end of this supply chain. You might see a truck, that's a truck, 2 trucks actually parked, delivering groceries. And all of those vehicles parked around it, including the hand carts on the sidewalk. There's not one in the picture, but we see cargo bikes arrive, those vans, people in their passenger cars are picking up those goods to make last mile deliveries. So this is essentially an informal micro distribution center happening at the curbside because of the scale of operations that are happening. Why does this micro distribution happen? Because e-commerce is very different from traditional delivery in that traditional delivery, large volumes of goods go to a retail store and then individuals go to the store and pick up those goods. Now we've got all those disparate people in their own houses ordering very small amounts of goods who now need them to be delivered. So this is a big issue that the city has taken on a lot in the last year. There's been several bills passed through city council looking at new distribution solutions to address this curbside issue. Our topic today is really more the other end of the supply chain, which is where the goods are starting from before they get to their last mile, their home delivery. And so the graphic you see here just kind of illustrates 2 different trends that are happening because of this growth in e-commerce. We're seeing pushing out of warehouses. So I would say typical warehousing locations was in northern New Jersey. We have a lot of our warehousing in New Jersey and in parts of Brooklyn and Queens that have traditionally had warehousing. But as we've moved towards this massive volume of goods moving, warehousing has pushed west. So Eastern Pennsylvania is one of the fastest growing warehousing markets in the world because there's space to build these massive fulfillment centers that are needed by these e-commerce supply chains. The topic we're talking about today is the other end, which is the other trend that's happening, is that as we shift towards these on-demand services where we are expecting goods to arrive in 15 minutes or an hour or 2 hours, if you're in Brooklyn and you are expecting goods to be delivered within an hour or 30 minutes, those goods cannot be on the other side of the Verrazano Bridge. They need to be somewhere in Brooklyn where they're originating from. So that's why we're seeing this re-centralization of warehousing, these smaller scale distribution centers that are very close to the markets so that they can meet that demand for on-demand services. Now, something to note is that the vehicles being used for this are not necessarily the same depending on the type of distribution that's happening. So the picture at the top is a large scale truck that's being carrying goods, between those large scale warehouses in those ex-urban areas. The bike that you see at the bottom is actually a bike that's being used right now for some of the Amazon's last mile distribution in Manhattan out of one of the Prime Now facilities. You see these bikes over the last couple of weeks, these bikes have proliferated. And so just keeping in mind that the transportation of the goods out of the warehouse may be by something as small as that vehicle. So why Red Hook. Why are good and Sunset Park? Why is warehousing coming here? The New York City zoning code essentially allows warehousing development in areas that are zoned for manufacturing and areas that are zoned for one type of commercial use, C8 zoning. So the blue, particularly the dark blue here, are the areas that are zoned for manufacturing. So if you look at Brooklyn, there's essentially 3 major areas other than the airport where you see big clusters of industrial and manufacturing zoning. That is here along the waterfront in Red Hook and Sunset Park, in Canarsie and East New York, in areas that are close to the major freight routes coming between the airport and the population centers of the city. In New York, large trucks, commercial trucks are required to travel on a limited truck route network. The dark blue are the through truck routes. Through truck routes are the routes they're supposed to use if the goods are traveling through the city. They're not stopping either beginning or ending in the city. The light blue are the routes that they're required to travel if their origin or destination is within the city. So the picture on the right shows this at a citywide scale. And if you look at those roads and you see where the through routes converge, you see why the Brooklyn waterfront is such a popular area for development for these types of distribution centers, because it's very accessible to the through truck route network. It provides quick access from New Jersey and particularly from Newark Airport. When we're talking about these on-demand services, if the goods aren't originating locally, they're frequently coming in by air. And so this location is sort of a central location, very close to the population centers in both Brooklyn and Manhattan and Queens, but also located with good highway access to Newark and Newark Airport, as well as to JFK, which are both major airports for the movement of these goods. So in closing, before I turn it over to Karen, what does this mean for a neighborhood? There are a lot of complex trade-offs when warehousing and distribution centers move into the neighborhood. I would say the big key trade-off is between jobs and traffic and all of the negative externalities that come with traffic. So not just traffic, but the emissions that would come from burning fuel from large trucks, the collision risk that comes from added large truck vehicle miles in a neighborhood. And so what you can see here, though, generally the positive for a neighborhood of warehousing development is the jobs. But you can't just say jobs are good or bad. You have to look at how many jobs are being created. What is the quality of those jobs? Are they paying a living wage? Are they high-tech jobs? Are they new jobs, or are they jobs that are being replaced? So for example, if they're replacing better manufacturing jobs, that's a negative for the neighborhood. If they're new jobs, that might be a positive for the neighborhood. And then when you think about those jobs, does the community actually have access to those jobs and to the training associated with those? On the traffic side, you need to think about first the construction impact. So as you build out these huge facilities, there's going to be a big transportation impact on a neighborhood. Then once they're operational, we need to think about not only are they open, but what are they doing? Is it an automated warehouse? If it's an automated warehouse, the traffic generated might be like something on the order of 3 times higher than if it's a traditional warehouse. Is it a distribution center? Is it a return center? All of these things are going to affect the hours that the facility would be operating. And then how are the goods actually moving into and particularly out of that distribution center? So again, one that's generating very large truck trips is going to have a different impact on the neighborhood than one that's going to generate those bikes or smaller vans. It may be, and that's going to be a trade-off in terms of vehicle types as well as number of trips. And then how are the employees getting to and from this facility? And then finally, what is the local infrastructure? Are there safety improvements in place to make sure that pedestrians walking near the facility are able to? What is the traffic control? Does it need to be updated? And then finally, how close is this to those large truck routes? Are trucks just entering and exiting the major freeways, or are they actually traveling through the neighborhood? So these are all just things to think about as we move into kind of the discussion specifically here on the Brooklyn waterfront. And with that, I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Okay, so thank you very much, Allison. That's a great overview. And you put on the table some of the questions that we'll be dealing with. Our next speaker is going to be Thaddeus, who will come on now. Thaddeus, your speaker is off right now.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. You might want full screen. Good.
Okay, I'm going to try to put what Allison just said in the context of climate change. I think everybody knows that New York City is very vulnerable to rising sea level, increased storms, increased precipitation. It's getting hotter in places like Red Hook and industrial areas in particularly, or historically redlined areas. And we know because of climate change, we have to change everything right now. And there's a lot of people working to change things. We've got a lot of work on sustainability. We're working toward electrifying our transportation network. We're working on all this stuff, but it's diffuse and it's not applied to every single project or every single sector. And I think that's one of the things we should be thinking about in relation to these logistics centers. And I don't think we're supposed to be calling them warehouses because they're not warehouses. What we're talking about here is a new kind of infrastructure for the distribution of goods, logistics centers, distribution centers. And we really have to think about how they're going to be part of this transition. And this transition, of course, is like completely unprecedented, this transition to a post-fossil fuel economy. And it has to happen quickly. And if it doesn't, of course, well, what's already happening, which is the most poor and disadvantaged, are going to suffer the most. So it really comes down to a question of our values about the future. We think that the way that we plan infrastructure now is really a matter of life and death for the whole planet, but particularly for the most disadvantaged. So this is my center. We work on trying to use research in urban planning and design to help communities around the world adapt to climate change. And we talk about resilience, community resilience, as a way to help communities thrive in the face of these changes. So been working in Red Hook. There's been so much community planning in Red Hook since Sandy. I'm just going to jump ahead. This is, of course, Sandy's impact in Red Hook, storm surge, covering the first floor of all these places where the warehouses are being built, but also public housing, thousands of units of public housing. Here's Karen and lots of other people who are on this call that have worked for many years trying to think about the future of this neighborhood. So while we're in these meetings, meanwhile, on the waterfront, there's this massive transition happening. And this is the Lidgerfield warehouse being torn down on Memorial Day weekend 2 years ago to build the first UPS facility. And our streets are, even though there's not supposed to be these 53-foot trailers coming down neighborhood streets, see them all the time, and the streets are falling apart, frankly. They're flooding, the infrastructure underneath the streets, the sewer lines are cracking, the streets are falling apart. And the other thing about Red Hook that's important to understand is that it's really divided, and I think that people don't talk about this enough. It's uncomfortable to talk about, but there's a rich gentrifying waterfront where home values are escalating and home ownership rates are way above like citywide average. And then we have public housing where there's a large concentration of poverty. There's also a lot of health issues. There's a Red Hook initiative did a survey a few years ago that said, I think 1 in 3 people in public housing households have some sort of respiratory disease. So air pollution is a pretty major issue for residents of public housing. So we've done these like visioning exercises to talk about what are the issues today in Red Hook and like what are possible futures. And the one future that like seemed like it was going to happen for some time, because AECOM, this big engineering company, did this like Hudson Yards type of plan for Red Hook, and you can look elsewhere on the Brooklyn Queens waterfront and see this like post-industrial landscape turning over to luxury condos and waterfront promenades, very vanilla, very basic. Some amount of affordable housing, but that didn't look like Red Hook's future, and no one wants this, and so this is what is happening instead, which maybe there are good things about it, but there are definitely things to keep an eye on. Like as we become in Red Hook, like a logistics center, what does that mean for air pollution, for job quality, like Allison was talking about? What does that mean for also neighborhood character? And what is the other alternative? And this is something that I feel like we haven't at all figured out, but this is just like a brainstorm among some community members, that what these waterfront neighborhoods that were zoned for in 1961 for manufacturing, really want to be job centers, and job centers in a new economy, a Green New Deal, like green jobs. You know, the future of America could be in these waterfront post-industrial landscapes. This is where we need to create renewable energy, new kinds of electrified transportation, new ways to build housing, build good quality housing for everyone, especially for houseless people and people on the margins of finding a good place to live. That's not what we're getting. We're getting 5 big warehouses and a lot of trucks. So I think one of the things to focus on is like what we can do. I mean, there's the long-term question of how do we create zoning that really supports the kinds of jobs that we want in this new economy. And then the other issue is like, what do we do about these warehouses now that are coming in? So this is just like me putting a collage of one of these logistics centers onto the UPS site. I don't know if anybody's seen the UPS plans yet, so this is just a guess. And these are some of the issues, you know, like just site issues that I would say are coming with these warehouses. First of all, like the biggest issue I think is cutting off the possibility of anything else happening here, including like coastal protection, including more places for water to be stored, not just in storm surge, but like in heavy rainfall events. And foreclosing the opportunity of public access to the waterfront, which has been a major citywide policy goal for 50 years. So, and it's bringing more cars, more trucks, more heat, you know, more paved surfaces, which means more urban heat island effect, which means more exacerbation of ongoing respiratory issues for many residents. So what can we do? Well, there's a lot of ideas, and there's a lot of people on the call right now who have come up with some brilliant ideas, like Jim Tumpakis, who has ideas about freight, and maybe we'll hear some more of those ideas about maritime freight. You know, but I think we could also just do more on the actual site design. And could these, you know, these are major. These warehouses, you know, it's obviously it's privately owned land. They can do whatever they want with it, but they're using public streets. They're using a lot of public infrastructure to roll out this private operation. So shouldn't we expect more from them? You know, shouldn't we expect them to have 100% electrified fleet? Shouldn't we expect them to do local job training, to source all of their local materials from local vendors, to really try to invest in the local economy? So this is a little sketch of like what they're doing today. Not even talking about, you know, Allison talked a little bit about traffic, obviously, and the impact on small local businesses. Those are pretty big issues, but also the impact on local jobs. So why couldn't we, you know, actually ask these warehouses to, instead of hurting local businesses, like give a leg up to local businesses, maybe create an incubator space for local businesses. Green roofs is a no-brainer. Pervious paving. They're huge roofs. Like, can't they generate community solar power so that we're more resilient to future power outages? So that's just a few thoughts from me, but Karen's the real expert, so I'm excited to hear from her next.
Okay, thank you, Thaddeus. I should mention before we hear from Karen that both the we tried to get someone from the Department of Transportation to speak today. We tried to get someone from UPS to speak today, and we were unsuccessful. UPS was too busy delivering packages during Christmas time or whatever it was. But so I just wanted to make that note. It would have been interesting to have heard from those agencies and to have engaged them in this conversation. And so now, Karen, your speaker has to. Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure. So thank you for having me today. I'm very fortunate in many ways to be veil penned. I don't know if you understand the word veil penned, but I'm kind of fortunate to be veil penned between the Red Hook, Waterfront, and the Gowanus community. And I say that because we have an abundance of environmental justice organizations like Resilient Red Hook, like 350 Brooklyn. We have people like Thaddeus Blowski, and many, many people who have been in the area concerned about environmental injustices as well as the built environment. And so I've learned a lot over the last decade about the topography that makes up Red Hook and Gowanus. And just like Thaddeus just mentioned, I am a member of the Resilient Red Hook team, and people like Jim Topakis, he has a lot of great ideas around marine commerce and how to move things around in that way. When I say veil pen between Gowanus and Red Hook, I'm really talking about the fact that on one end, we have the Gowanus Canal, which is one of the dirtiest sites in all of North America. And that site brought in the brick and mortar that built Brooklyn. But it also, as everyone knows, is an open sewer. And so when I think about last mile trucking, I don't just confine it to Red Hook, because on one side of Red Hook, we have the water, which would be a great solution. But we also have on the other side, this canal. We're also in a lowland area. And when you put all of that together, it creates a very unique situation for public housing residents who are trapped in between these two locations. As Thaddeus said, since Hurricane Sandy, we have organized across Red Hook to build a collaboration around resiliency, sustainability, adaptability to save our community, because we don't want to be a sacrifice zone. And so we've been working diligently with all kinds of city agencies and organizations around coastal resiliency, around $500 million for a process that's going on in the Red Hook houses. And so when I think about all of that, and then I think about redlining, and I think about how many times government steps into areas where collaborations like this between public housing residents like myself and people like Thaddeus Pulowski and Department of City Planning, when we're actually modeling the way communities should talk and get answers from the government, we always get like sucker punch with something that we weren't expecting. So I don't have anything personally against Amazon, because I, like many other people, have been forced to use some of those services because we were in a global pandemic. So I understand the increase in wanting things and needing things. But we also, like Thaddeus said, we have to have solutions that are going to work for this neighborhood, because we do have high rates of asthma. We do have a lot of truck traffic already. I've been in Red Hook since 1982. When I first got here, I was afraid because most of the manufacturing and commercial sites were shut down. So I would have to walk 1 or 2 blocks with no pedestrian activity to get to work or to get home. In the last 2 years, it's not even just the last mile distribution centers in Red Hook. There is activity almost at every single block from here to Gowanus. And they have an 80-block rezoning that is scheduled to start. So that's going to even bring in more construction, more traffic, more things having to move. And then we have the Brooklyn Queens Expressway, where we know over by the promenade that infrastructure is falling apart. So I'm having some issues with wrapping my mind around how we're going to keep these trucks on their designated routes. Who knows the difference between whether this truck is making a local delivery or is supposed to be on the throughway highway. So those are things that we need money from these organizations like Amazon, like UPS, to educate the public, the residents, and the community of Red Hook on exactly what we heard from our first speaker. What are the designated routes? What are the laws and environmental emissions and regulations that we should be looking out for to maintain control, where we can coexist with this type of new industry influx? It's not the same as old warehouses where we had grain coming in or brick and mortar coming in. This is, as explained, last mile trucking, where other vans and bikes and other types of transportation will be coming in doing curbside pass-offs. So I just wanted to talk about that. I also want to talk about the issue around electrification, which I do agree with, but we need education around that too. Most people notice when we put a mask on, it actually affected our hearing and our vision, because I could see you on Zoom for a month and then I walk past you in the street because I have not been able to connect the Zoom person with the in-person person as easily as we did before the pandemic. So the same thing when it comes to transitioning from diesel into electrification. Those vehicles are very quiet. What about people who have disabilities, like hearing disabilities or visual? We walk around New York because of the pace using more than 5 senses. And I believe that we have to solve the problem around how do we alert this neighborhood if that transition is going to take place to electric vehicles as a solution. And then I'm just going to share, I know I'm all over the place, because when I think about last mile trucking, I'm trying to be equitable and also realistic that certain things are just never going to go away again. And so this need for 20-minute deliveries is new and it's real. And I don't see it going anywhere because we rely on this new technology to make ourselves who we are here in New York, one of the super cities of the world. But we do have to maintain a relationship that is not just our electeds talking on behalf of us, but companies like Amazon and UPS literally coming out and creating a climate core with us, where we look at this neighborhood and we talk to the people in this neighborhood who know about the topography, about urban heat island, about the resiliency processes, so that they really feel connected to this community in a way that supports us, so that we can try to support them. So that means listening to Resilient Red Hook, listening to the Red Hook Initiative, listening to Public Housing Civic Association in relationship to how that feels to have trees cut down. All of these processes happening at the same time. So I'm just gonna stop after I share these slides that I'm gonna ask Celia to show you. Because not only did this last mile trucking take place very quickly during the pandemic, but this is a picture of what Red Hook's tree campus looked like just prior to the pandemic, just prior to like Hurricane Sandy. So these trees take 50 to 60 years to grow to that height. And you see the grass around the buildings, all of that created cooling. We also had some sprinkler systems throughout the area so that elderly people could come downstairs, sit on a bench under a tree, get some cooling, get some communication with other neighbors so that they didn't have to sit in their house and die alone of loneliness, you know? And so when Hurricane Sandy hit, you can go to the next slide. When Hurricane Sandy hit, we lost a lot of trees, but the significant loss of trees was not due to just salinization or the water coming into the neighborhood. It was due to the resiliency processes that the developers, the contractors decided to do to make Red Hook resilient. So they cut down over 457 trees between the start of the pandemic and the middle of the pandemic in order to bring in heavy equipment and to lay new foundations for heating and domestic hot water. But I want us to think more deeply about these type of trade-offs, because remember, these trees take 60 years to grow. So now we're stuck in a situation where we lost a significant amount of our tree canopy, which helps us to stay cool in this urban industrial area. And I look up the block and I see 1,000 trucks coming down the block with emissions. Trees also filter out, just like your lungs, trees filter out particle matter. And so I'm concerned with these warehouses and distribution centers and these trucks and these vehicles that will be increasingly coming through our streets, idling. We don't know the difference between a refrigerated truck that can idle versus a truck that shouldn't be idling. We need education, and we need money for that type of education so that Red Hook can be resilient. So I think I want to show you one more slide, and that slide is just going to really show you what Red Hook looked like 2 years after Hurricane Sandy. You can see that we still had a lot of tree canopy, but then salinization in the middle slide showed that there was a reduction in our tree canopy. But what really bothered me was during the pandemic, how much work got by and was getting done with very little conversation with the community about cutting down our trees. So the last slide shows you from the air how much tree canopy we lost. And this slide shows you how it looked to me and how traumatizing that was for me to walk through these 40 acres and see tree graveyards like this. And it just was very traumatizing. It's going to increase the respiratory issues in Red Hook. And we want some real conversations with these corporations to make sure that they stay good neighbors. So I'm gonna stop right there. And thank you.
Richard, you're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Karen. And those insights are touching. The tree devastation is touching. And just one of the other things that you said struck a chord with me. You mentioned that one of the things that electric vehicles are going to be all well and good, but that the community has to learn to live with electric vehicles. And one of the things means being alert to how they sound or don't sound. And I just have 2 points totally offline about this. But point number one is, of course, at the beginning of the 20th century, as trolley cars came into Brooklyn, instead of the horse and carriages, which went at a certain pace and made a certain kind of sound. And when people crossed streets, they were used to that. But then trolley cars came, and so people didn't hear them. They had to run. Of course, they appeared a little bit quicker. Thus, you had the name of the Brooklyn Dodgers. And people were actually killed with this. And my grandmother's first husband was in fact a victim of that. He was killed, and had he survived, my grandmother wouldn't have married my grandfather. I wouldn't have been here, and who knew? The rest of us might not have been here right now either. But at any rate, yes, the different sound in an urban environment makes a very big difference. So thank you. And now there's some kind of ameliorations that we have heard about and modifications. And now I'm very pleased to hear John Pawlowski, who's going to talk about the role that maritime can play in this. John, thank you.
Can you see me?
Yes.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here. Just a quick background on me. I went to New York Maritime College. I spent 45 years in the marine business, 35 years in New York City alone. And to give everyone a perspective on the feasibility of marine freight, for 20 years, I worked for a company and we moved 72 million tons of crushed rock from Havre to Brooklyn, New York, with a 3,000 horsepower tugboat at the cost of $6 a ton. When you look at the cost of the horsepower relative to the amount of freight being moved, it's 1/6 of what a truck would take to move that same amount of freight. In New York, we've got a series of viable docks in Brooklyn, Queens, Manhattan, and Staten Island. The problem we're faced with is that we do have a rising sea level, but there is a solution to that. And what the city has been doing is they've been increasing the height of the fixed docks using concrete caps. It's very feasible. For those facilities that are on the waterfront that don't have a dock, there's another solution that's very easy to do, and it's commonly done in the marine business. And we would use what we call a spud barge, S-P-U-D. This is generally a 30-foot by 90-foot barge with 4 spuds, which are 12-inch diameter pipes. The barge draws about 1.5 feet of water, so you can get in very close. It could be installed in one day, and a ramp would be placed ashore, and that would be used as a anchoring spot, mooring spot for some of these marine vessels. In terms of pollution and electric propulsion, Stevens Institute engineering professor just completed a paper funded by the Naval Research Center dealing with electric propulsion. So this is an up and coming thing. We don't really have it in place yet, but certainly in terms of the amount of emissions with regard to the amount of tonnage moved with conventional diesel engines is far less than what it would be for tugboats. The other issue is we're not constrained. We can go across to New Jersey. That's not an issue. The transit time is extremely quick. And so those problems are all solved. The money makes sense. We've done the financial analysis. That all makes sense. There is grant money available as well. Those issues are all solvable. The biggest issue that I'm faced with is finding the cargo, identifying the cargo, because that's going to identify the type of vessel, how the cargo is unloaded. Do I need a forklift? Do I need a crane? Can we use people holding it by hand? And then the second part of that is the final mile transportation. Are we talking bicycles? Well, that would depend on the type of cargo. Are we talking a van? But even if we're talking a van, we're talking a very short distance. We're talking a mile or 2 miles. So these problems are all very, very solvable. I do have an operator standing by. He's available. He owns a tug and barge company. He's also New York Maritime. And all these pieces are in place. All we're waiting for is a cargo source. And once we got that, then we could put the rest together. Thank you very much. I can't hear you.
Excuse me, I keep forgetting to unmute myself. Just one question. So can you see the freight that would be in those facilities being delivered to those facilities via the water highway? So is that what is that possible, and where would it originate? And maybe not only John but Allison can come into there. So like you have, where would it come from what maritime facility to, let's say, the facilities in Red Hook?
The question, yes, it can be delivered via water for sure. Answer to number two is I suspect it would come from South Jersey, on the Jersey side. Vinnick Marine has a marine terminal down there that could be suitable right off of 95. And we could use that as well. There are other numerous terminals that could be utilized. The biggest question though, once again, is, are we talking 1 pound boxes or 500 pound crates? And that would make a difference in terms of the infrastructure, which would make it somewhat more costly. And that's the big question, is to identify the freight.
Okay. And Allison, you've looked at this, and would there be a place, let's say, for where these goods come from? So I don't know if it would be through planes, near airports. Would there be marine facilities near where these freight trucks are aggregated? Would there be marine facilities nearby to get these freight trucks or what's in them to the facilities in Brooklyn?
Let me just interject one. Let me interject one point here.
Yes.
All the airports have marine facilities.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't have a lot of specifics, and I see a number of people are pointing to Jim Tempakis who to comment on this. So I think he's the real expert. The only thing I would say before that is, I think the question when it comes to e-commerce is the speed by which goods need to move. So if it's going to go onto water, it needs to be as fast as if it was going to be moving by truck, or at least it's got to meet the minimum expectation of the delivery time. Otherwise, it's not feasible within the supply chain. That absolutely does not mean that there are not solutions that do make 100% sense. And we're seeing in a lot of European cities, they're starting to pilot different marine-based solutions in London and in Paris, and in similar context to New York. So, you know, I think I will turn it over to the real expert on this to discuss it, if that's okay with you. But that's my 2 cents on it.
Okay, so Jim, I think you are able to speak. Usually on a webinar you can't, but I think our very capable staff has, there you are, put you on there. So in relation to that question about where it would come from, and you know, the issue that both John and Allison mentioned.
So basically, we're not reinventing the wheel. There's already facilities that are proven right now in place. The Department of Sanitation moves freight, 20-foot containers every day, hundreds of them, into the Gowanus right across the street from where, right across the street from Red Hook, right by where the new FedEx terminal is coming in. So basically, it's just a couple of cranes. We have, like I said, the freight would come in from certain points, convenient points in Jersey, Pennsylvania, let's say like the Amazon situation. If you go to the 640columbia.com Vimeo that they have on their site, they're showing freight coming out of Jersey, and they're showing freight coming out of Pennsylvania that's coming into this site. So what they could do is they can, out of those distribution centers, put their freight on a chassis, bring it to a convenient location like the Department of Sanitation is doing in Jersey, offloading the containers, putting them on a barge. They have hopper barges. that they're using. Norfolk Tug and Barge is presently doing this operation for that facility, for those facilities. They could put up to, I've spoken to them several times with Ed Wheatley with Norfolk Tug and Barge. They have barges that can hold 150 containers, 40-foot containers. So for every barge, we got 150 tractor trailers off of the streets. They would come right into Red Hook. They would unload. They would be brought to these, let's say, Amazon facilities or UPS facilities, facility that's coming in right now. And then on the next leg, after they break down the freight, like John had mentioned as well, it would again, they would be broken down into zip codes, put into smaller container pods, and then again, put on a different type of boat and go do the last mile delivery to where bicycles, electric scooters, electric bikes would be able to intercept the freight, put it on their chassis, and then do the last mile delivery to the end destination, end user. There's a video that Zulu Associates came out with. It's 57 seconds long. I don't know I don't know if we could put that on. I spoke with Antoon yesterday, and we're further in Belgium. They're based out of Belgium. They've been doing these feasibility studies, and they're coming up. They've been talking with the EDC. They're really into this. There's a lot of good ideas. I spoke to him yesterday, and I told him that I wanted to create a first phase of the same type of video so that we could show how we're going to be bringing in these containers into the various facilities again that we have right by the water. I mean, the 5 sites that we have are, basically on the water or a block away from the water. So, it's something that we need to do. And, I had spoken to Hank Gutman about it when we met in the summertime, and he thought it was a good idea. And it's basically, it's a needed thing. I mean, I live in Bay Ridge, and to go 3 miles in the morning, it takes me an hour because of all of the traffic and all the trucks. So, I mean, if we can relieve some of that, it's a no-brainer.
So Jim, I think you said this is a 59-second video?
57, yes, less than 1 minute.
So actually, we still have a half hour, so it might be worth showing this, and one of our staff will get this on. I think they already said in the chat that they have the link to the video, and let's see if we could get that. And if Ariel or Celia, you could just tell me when it's ready to go. We could continue with our conversation about this or a related thing until it's ready. Ariel or Celia, would you want to come on? Here it goes. Okay.
So basically, they're showing where the freight has to go from A to B, and normal transportation would be via truck. There is sound on it, but, and then the truck gets stuck in all sorts of traffic, and then they're showing container ships, but we're not talking about a container ship. We're talking about a specialty vessel that could handle smaller pods that would be brought into the various facilities. They're just basically, you could do fish. I know that Hunts Point Market is looking at stuff like this. So instead of just using the water, bypassing the roads, they're clean, and then you have the flexibility of discharging the freight on basically anywhere, because, these people have designed, Zulu Associates have designed, they came up with a design with bow thrusters, so they would be able to control the vessels, placed right next door. They don't have to tie up to the bulkhead of where they're going to be discharging. And then, the continuation is to either load them onto electric vehicles or onto bicycles. And it's just really, it makes life easy. And then the previous phase would be bringing in the freight into that. That was it. So it just keeps repeating. So, and then the previous thing would be to bring in the freight again via container, just the way Department of Sanitation is, unloading them, putting them at, let's say, Amazon. We'll use them as an example at 280 Richard Street. They have 14 loading docks, leave the freight there, unload the containers, put it into their warehouses, and then put the empties back in a position so that this way they can get put back on the barge and then sent back over to Jersey, where they would pick them up, bring them back to their, New Jersey facilities or Pennsylvania facilities or wherever they're coming from. And then, just have this happen on a regular basis. In this way, we don't see trucks on our bridges, on our highways. There's no pollution. They're working on right now. Norfolk Tug and Barge has Tier 4 diesel engines, which is basically 85% clean. And they're working on upgrading to Tier 5, which would be 100% clean. I went on the Harbor Harvest vessel as well, where they have, they're operating electric. Their boat is electric. They have diesel backups, but this way we were on the boat on the North Shore for 3.5 hours, and they never started their engines.
Now, is at what state, who's speaking, to whom are you speaking about this? Is there, are there people who are making decisions who are interested in this? Are you getting to speak to people who make decisions about this?
Yes. Well, for starters, the EDC is on board, and we're trying to put the whole package together with the EDC. The EDC has the Dock NYC plan and the Freight NYC plan. They've already have like 8 or 10 New York City sites that are in various parts of the city that would be able to accommodate freight for both levels. And then they also have the Freight NYC package as well, which you could just go on, everybody can go online and look at them. But besides the Dock NYC city facilities, they're also trying to get private owners that are waterfront, have waterfront availability to join in, so that this way we would be able to extend and go to New York City's 520 miles of waterfront properties that we have available to us. So, I mean, it's really the logistics, putting it all in place, and we can make it happen within a couple of years. So,
okay. All right,
and
thank you.
can I just add
Sure,
to that,
Allison.
that DOT is also on board with this as a solution. They're looking at proactive methods. I think the biggest challenge is exactly what John raised in his presentation, is just finding the right cargo that's going to use these solutions. Yeah.
Okay. To the audience, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. And I see we have one question in there now that Thaddeus would like to answer. And the question is, how involved has the community been in the decision as to where to locate the fulfillment centers? And does it worry you that, for example, the Amazon warehouse being built right next to a park and a community farm? And so Thaddeus, and again, open questions, put them in the Q&A, please, and we'll have them looked at and answered by the panelists from there. And thank you very much, Jim. And you and John seem to be at least presenting us with something that gives a little hope.
Yeah, I agree on that. But this question, on the approvals for this, I think and maybe I didn't say this, but this is as of right construction is the term, meaning that there are no approvals necessary, at least from the zoning. They have to get like a building permit approval, but there's no conversation about things like whether or not this makes sense to build next to a park, whether or not the streets can accommodate it. There's no environmental review for an as of right project. And that's why, you know, the zoning, which was written in 1961, hasn't changed significantly since then for this area of the city. Before, you know, these types of facilities were even contemplated, you know, they by zoning, this is called a warehouse, but it's not a warehouse. It's a big machine where trucks come in and out every day. And so it's something different, and there probably should be, you know, a way to address this differently in zoning in the future. So one thing on this, you know, that has come up in conversations is the city has made special permits. They're called special permits, basically, that would require an environmental review and a public conversation of some kind, either a city planning commission or maybe, you know, community board presentation. And they've done this for last mile, or not for last mile warehouses, which is a good idea, but they've done it for hotels and manufacturing zones, and they've done it for self-storage and manufacturing zones. After, you know, similar public outcry about what was happening. You know, those are two things that in our manufacturing zones that sort of conflict with the goal of manufacturing zones, which is to promote jobs. So to hold that land so that we can have more jobs. And I would say that this sort of falls into that same category of things that are not helping our manufacturing zones promote more jobs.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just add to what
sure.
Thaddeus is saying? So I recall I was mentioning about the rezoning that's going on in Gowanus. And so the issue there is that DCP agreed that they would not allow any more combined sewer overflow to go into the Gowanus Canal. The problem is there's a 72-inch main that's adjacent to the canal that runs through Red Hook. And it actually runs pretty much underneath the truck route. So this solution was put in place in the 1990s through the 197A plan that we devised because we were tired of receiving all of these waste transfer and treatment centers, even in the 90s. So Red Hook is a brownfield. Red Hook has a unique sewer system that runs underground and then it's pumped to the Brooklyn Navy Yard. We've consistently asked for a sewer study to make sure that our infrastructure can hold this additional truck traffic that's coming through here. We're creating resiliency around the waterfront to keep surge out. I don't want to be knee deep in poo. You know, I don't want to be knee deep in poo. We know that we had a sanitary condition back in the 1800s that took the 10 cities out of Red Hook and created public housing. And now here we are again in a global pandemic where we run the risk of a sanitary era again. So we got to look at how this infrastructure is going to be maintained in regards to all this additional truck traffic. So I just wanted to talk about that and the fact that, you know, when Thaddeus says as of right, I know I'm talking to a lot of urban planners and I get it. We need to change those policies because the community has to have more say on these type of topics when it comes to 6 and 7 of these infrastructures coming into a community at one time. But I'm willing to talk to them as long as they support the Red Hook community and our environmental equity that we're building here. Thank you.
Okay, here's a question that refers us back to the Maritime system. And I think, John, you might have mentioned this or have addressed this. Can many of these transshipment facilities be made buoyant so they go up and down with future Sandys and high tides that are amplified by sea level rise?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, we call that a spud barge, SPUD, and it floats with the tide. The Army Corps of Engineers may require a permit if it's there for an extended period of time, but that should not be a problem. But the answer is yes.
Okay, thank you. We have another question. Who would require or incentivize the use of maritime solutions or other solutions that could minimize the suite of traffic-related impacts? And who would like to answer this question?
I think the shipper. I think Amazon, UPS, people like that. They would drive the business.
Okay, so
And yeah, if I can just comment on this in a kind of general policy context. So I think part of the reason why we've seen these solutions implemented more quickly in like European cities, you know, as compared to American cities, one is the structure of the city, but two is the regulatory environment. So in the United States, when we start dealing with goods movements, we get into the purview of interstate commerce, which then it becomes a question of who is actually responsible for regulating it. Under the Constitution, interstate commerce falls under the federal government, which makes it a challenge for like the city of New York, for example, to implement a low emission zone like they have in London or like they have in Paris, where the city actually regulates what vehicles can come in. Just in our government context, that again, it's not that there's no future solution, but it's not necessarily going to be the same solutions that have been used in other places.
okay, here's another. What are the incentives? And this might relate to what you were just saying, Allison. What are the incentives or penalties the government can use to push cleaner transport? The city seems to have no interest in enforcing truck routes and loading rules we already have. So I hope we have to transform our regional transport system in the way without transformative legislation. DOT and the EDC may be on board on paper, but what are they doing to effect real change?
Yeah, so I would say based on what I just said, incentives are more likely than regulations or more likely to be implemented, I think. And there are examples of programs that like City DOT has implemented, the Clean Trucks program at Hunts Point, where they essentially worked with, you know, different funding mechanisms to provide financial incentives for operators to install clean truck technologies. And then there's agreements where they're tracking data and things like that. So I think that's definitely an opportunity that I don't know who within the city, you know, if this is going to require that zoning change with a special permit, where part of the permit would be that you participate in these kinds of, you know, implement these specific kinds of solutions or have those kinds of programs.
Okay, here's something, a question. For a long time, as many of you I'm sure know, Congressman Gerald Nadler has, from the time he was a state senator, been pushing for the Cross Harbor Freight Rail Tunnel. And now I understand there's even some money in some of the new infrastructure packages, legislation that's just been passed to study this further. If that were ever to come into being, what effect might that have on this discussion? And the Cross Harbor Freight Rail Tunnel, for those who don't know, would be to have it from, you know, from Jersey under the harbor coming up in Brooklyn and making use of some freight rail tunnels that actually could get you all the way out to Long Island. But have any of you a comment on that or thoughts on that?
I would like to just ask, I mean, in order to do something like that, how many years are we away from that? You know, that we're talking about building a tunnel. We're talking about, I mean, we're talking years. And by
decades.
then,
He's been trying to get it to this far in 30 years.
I understand, but so, yeah, okay. So, and now we're talking about, we're worried about the 6th and 7th facility coming into Red Hook at this point. So,
Right.
I mean, the thing that's mind-boggling is that how can we just keep putting in these last mile warehouses when we've never really studied the impact of all of these trucks that we're going to have? How much more pollution are we going to have? You know, when we're going to be dropping like flies at the end of the day over here because of what's going to be going on. You know, when you talk, when you just try and figure that Amazon is putting up 2 facilities, 640 Columbia, 280 Richard Street, and they're looking to do, it comes out to like 750,000 or 700 and something thousand square feet in these 2 facilities. And they're high cube warehouses. They're 28-foot ceiling heights is what they're showing on their videos, 28 foot. If you do some basic math, you know, you're talking about 11 million cubic feet of inventory that they're looking to bring in here. And then again, if you do math and you look and you say, okay, that's about 10,000 40-foot containers of freight coming into the neighborhood to load up these warehouses. So, you know, my question is always, what's the turnaround going to be? You know, how often are they going to be turning around these warehouses where we're going to have 10,000 trucks coming in? Forget about the Sprinter vans leaving the neighborhood. The Sprinter vans, if you sit down, and I've looked at the Sprinter vans, I've looked at the size of the Sprinter vans, you're talking 67,000 Sprinter vans to empty out those 2 warehouses, totally empty them out. So now we're talking about constant, you got tractor trailers going to be coming in, unloading, and then you're going to have all of these Sprinter vans every day leaving to go and do their last mile deliveries and coming back in. That's why water is something that we all need to promote. We won't see them, we won't hear them. At nighttime, I go over to the Home Depot on the 2nd floor, right next door to the Department of Sanitation where the cranes are, and they operate at nighttime. You don't hear them. You could barely see them. I mean, it's such a beautiful thing. You have no trucks on the street. You have no pollution. You don't have any additional potholes and whatnot. You know, in Red Hook, we have 2 truck routes coming into the neighborhood. Well, 3 truck routes. We have Clinton Street, which goes right by public housing, which is crazy that it's a truck route. And the road narrows because the post office is right there. Then you have Court Street, where you're making a right turn on right at the parks, and you're coming right through the parks to get to their facilities. And then you have Van Brunt Street, where everybody that lives a block either on Van Brunt Street or a block away from Van Brunt Street, they wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning when these tractor trailers start coming out of the neighborhood to go do their deliveries, because from the existing businesses now. So now if we're talking thousands of trucks every day in and out, I mean, what's going to happen to us with these 2 streets? We got schools, we have commercial shopping, we have, you know, we just have all of these different things that we're trying to build up in the neighborhood. And now we have to deal with this big headache.
Okay, Allison, does your research take you to looking at numbers and volume and numbers of trucks and the like, and where they go? And does anybody, you know, make these calculations?
Yeah, so I would say that's a big problem, because that is a data that is not publicly available. There are lots of studies being done trying to put a number on that using, you know, publicly available GPS sources and things like that. But the answer is it really depends on the warehouse. So you mentioned, you know, a high cube warehouse is going to generate more trips than one that's not a high cube warehouse because of the rate of turnover. If it's turning over very quickly, you know, I think some estimates I've seen from the Lehigh Valley, those very large fulfillment centers, I think the highest number I saw for a high cube warehouse there was like 400 trucks a day. You know, so it's not a trivial number of trucks if you're talking about that times 7 warehouses, which is not what's there now. It's less than that. But if you start looking to the future at that, so I mean, Jim's point is exactly right. If you're going to be moving this volume of goods through this location, we need to find better, more efficient ways of doing it. That's not just going to be large trucks running, across residential streets. I guess the challenge is that the reason that they're putting the warehouse there is that there's the demand on these services to get those goods. So that's I guess another piece of the puzzle.
Okay, anyone else have questions about that? Someone, you might want to look in the chat, has spoken about the deleterious effects that the tunnel would have in Bay Ridge near Fort Hamilton Parkway, and with the truck traffic already from the Verrazano Bridge being heavy. And so if that were to come into being, that would also hurt that neighborhood. And I know that Maspeth has the neighborhood of Maspeth in Queens would be affected by that tunnel as well. And they have vehemently fought against proceeding with that tunnel, which again is very far out. Here's someone asked a kind of political question. We have a new mayor, Mayor-elect Eric Adams. Is he aware of this? Does he have has he said anything about this? Is that, does anybody know the politics of that and our incoming mayor? Okay. And a question, what's the difference between High Cube and other warehouses? Is High Cube analogous to last mile centers in Brooklyn? That's just a technical definition of terms. Anybody?
Well, the last mile warehouse, I mean, the High Cube warehouse is basically, they're trying to stuff as much inventory as they can within each floor. So if they can go up, 28, a High Cube warehouse is anywhere from 24 to 32 foot ceiling heights. So that this way they put in their racks and they can really pack them in and get a lot of inventory, as opposed to a regular warehouse that we're used to, that's 14 or 16 foot ceiling heights or 20 foot ceiling heights. Now we're going up to 30 feet. And this way we have a lot of inventory. I just also wanted to mention that last week I had a conversation with UPS and regarding their facility, and I asked them what's going on, and they're saying that they're about a year or two away, that they're involved with other things. But I know that they've been talking to Red Hook Marine Terminal, which is very positive. So, and they're talking about bringing in container freight into Red Hook Marine Terminal. And we've always been pushing at Resilient Red Hook to have the freight go through Piers 10, 11, and 12, and then out on the corner of King Street and Ferris Street, which is only 1 block away from where the new UPS site is going to be built, so that this way we don't see UPS. I mean, they'll still be coming in on the highway, and if we can, or if we can have them, like I said, be, brought containers in to Red Hook Marine Terminal and just be brought in again, that would be a beautiful thing. But we also have, we have to push UPS to think about water delivery as well. So, this way, the next leg, just the way that that 57-second presentation was, if UPS can capitalize on that type of networking of, water distribution. So this way we don't see, those brown vans, because we're going to have a lot of them, because they're building a 1.2 million square foot facility over there.
Okay, so we're coming towards the end of our session, and I would like to offer each of our panelists some final words. So we'll start in the finish in the order we started. So Allison, would you have any last minute conversations or comments or thoughts that we can take with us?
So nothing major to add. I just wanted to state that I agree with everything Karen discussed about the community engagement with industry on this. I think that is the critical missing piece of this problem, is figuring out what is the mechanism to get community involved at the planning stages of these projects, so that we're not having this discussion after the decision's been made about what's being built. And I don't have a solution for that, but I think that's the really critical problem we have to address here.
Okay, thank you. And Thaddeus, any last comments?
Well, I'll just like build on what Allison said, and I think, you know, one strategy is like, where's government, like local government on this issue? So I think someone put in the chat, like, where's Eric Adams on this? I think this needs to be elevated to the transition team as something that they should work on right away. And I think that involves some of the solutions, the freight solutions that Jim and John talked about, but also land use decisions, infrastructure decisions. And yes, as Allison said, like resetting this conversation between community and industry, but I don't think it should be a one-off thing. You know, I don't think it's like we have a community benefits agreement with Amazon and that just solves everything, because we really need to regulate this. I think we really need a stronger hand of government.
Okay, thank you. Karen.
Yeah, and so I'll just say that thank you all. I do believe the missing link is civics. Most people don't know which forms of government that they should be soliciting to have these changes done. One of the most significant things that I saw happen while I was at Harvard, I heard at one point they were going to award each child separated at the border a significant amount of money. And so I did my research to find out, how did they get that solution in less than 2 years? And that is because they knew exactly which branch of government to saturate with comments. So we have to do a collective engagement process that either allows us to speak to UPS, to these entities as a model for other communities to follow, or we're gonna have to do a lot of pushing via legislation all the way up to our federal codes of regulations. So
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And John.
Yes, hi, thank you. One final comment. Portside, New York has a very interesting website. It deals with some of the very things we're talking about right now. And I would highly recommend that people take a look at that. That's it.
Yes, okay. And I also want to echo thanking Carlina, who runs Portside, for introducing me to both John and Jim. So thank you, Carlina, wherever you are. I know you're out there. And we said at the beginning of this that it was going to be like jazz rather than a symphony, where we would improvise and come in and out. And like in a jazz club, we had a trumpeter who was sitting in the audience, came up and did a riff for us. And Jim, so thank you very much. And do you have any last words?
The only thing I would love to see happen, if possible, I know that Thad, with the zoning resolutions that he mentioned, is to put a hold on any additional facilities, and so we can understand what the impact is going to be on the neighborhood, so that this way we don't get 2 more facilities that are going to be another 1 million point something square feet and have to deal with that extra headache. So I would love to see us just try and push and understand the impact that we're going to have on what's going to be built now before we start approving more facilities.
Okay, so to everyone on our panel, thank you very much. To those of you who participated and who came, thank you very much. And we will follow this issue. And it looks like once we can, BWRC can provide some kind of service once again, and bringing people together to talk about this and the other issues that we do along the Brooklyn waterfront, we will do that. And so with that, I will wish you all a good day and have a very nice weekend. Thank you, thank you, thank you. By the way, this has been recorded, as our panelists know, and it will be available on our website. It usually takes about a week or something, but just so that you should know that, those in the audience and panelists. And welcome back to Brooklyn, Karen from Massachusetts. Actually, I'm heading up there tomorrow, so not to Harvard though, they don't want me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye now.
Thank you, Allison. Great. Great
Yep,
work,
thank you.
John.
And I
Richard,
didn't thank Allison and Celia for all their great work.
Celia,
I'm sorry.
thank you.
Celia and Allison, thank you, thank you.
Thaddeus
Oh, my
and
goodness.
Jim and Carolina and everybody.
John,
Yes,
before I say, before you go, I noticed something I saw in the chat. I'll find it later, but there's a colleague, Roberta Weisbrod, who's the chair of the World Ferry Safety Committee, wants me to introduce you to her. So I will send an email where I'm introducing